Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by our friends at Reprieve Recovery. They're up there in Mountain Green, Morgan, if you will.
Hometown.
That's right. That's where.
Shout out to my hometown.
The birthplace to our very own Dr. Matt Woolley.
Well, not exactly, but that's where I grew up.
That's where your formidable years were?
Absolutely.
Is that where you would sneak behind the gas station or the supermarket and drink beer?
Maybe.
Are we not talking about that?
We just did.
Okay. Hey, we've got a great show for you today. And before we get to that, I wanted to talk to you, Dr. Matt, because I'm sure you'll give me some good insight to this.
I thought it's because you missed me all week.
I do miss you. And you came in with some vim and vigor.
Having a good day.
Yeah. And you know what I loved about it? You said, I'm choosing.
I am. It was
choosing to have a good day.
Because to be honest, I've had a lot of work going on this morning, but I'm choosing to have a good day. It's been a great day.
All right. Before we get to what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
How important is it to make that choice? Because I talk to people all the time and I go, for some of what's going on in your life, you have a choice. Majority of it, you have a choice.
Yeah.
Which seems weird when we're talking about addiction because I think once you get into that, sometimes you don't have a choice.
Well, addiction, there's a biological aspect and all of those kinds of things. But it's huge. What I say to myself and to people is you cannot control what happens to you that day, but you can choose your perception about what happens to you that day.
I was talking to my son and I says, the one thing you have a choice of is how you react to any given situation or how you react to certain information. And that's where you have a choice. You can choose to be offended.
Yeah.
You can choose to learn more. You can choose empathy. And so that's where you have a choice.
Yeah.
And so that's what you can do with your day and your attitude.
I woke up this morning with the intention of having a good day. I checked the weather. It's going to be great. I'm like, I'm going to have a great day today. Then I went to a meeting and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to sit through this meeting again. It was really not my favorite place to be. But you know what? I reframed it.
How?
It's over and I have the whole rest of the day ahead of me.
There you go.
And I walked out of that meeting feeling pretty good.
I love it. Hey, so I wanted to talk to you about yesterday. I was driving around with a friend, and he's having some crisis in his family, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this person, how to react, and what kind of help is out there.
Okay.
And so we were driving around and I was taking him to his house and I said, hey, keep me in the loop when you find out what's going on. And he sent me a text and he says, I think the crisis part of it's over. We've found this person and we're trying to figure out where to go next or what to do next. And he goes, any suggestions? And I said, I've got one. I go, when you do meet up with this person, listen. That's probably the most important thing you can do right now is listen. Because I know as a friend, I know as a father, I know as a peer that a lot of times what I want to do is fix your problem. What I want to do is tell you how to fix your problem and help you through that problem.
Right.
But I remember when I was in active addiction and I wasn't in the right headspace and there was a lot of things going on and I just wanted someone to listen. I didn't want my mom to tell me how I was messing up my life. I didn't want my dad to tell me how to fix it. Although their information was good and could have been useful at a different point in time, all I wanted somebody was to do is listen to me and hear me out and understand the pain that I was going through and that what was going on in my brain. But we don't listen a lot. We often want to just jump to fixing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted to talk to you.
I think that's because we care about the people that are going through a hard time, right?
I know, but I remember I talked to my ex-wife. I was like, I don't want you to fix this. I just want you to listen.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you what's on my heart. I want to tell you what's on my brain. I want to tell you how I'm feeling. And I just want somebody to listen. And I don't want you to try to fix it. I just want you to hear me out. But a lot of times I don't know if it's time or we want to fix that for them, but we don't know how. And so I just listen.
Yeah, I think the way I put it is there will be a time for solving problems. But that's getting the cart before the horse when we jump in with, and guys are particularly bad at this. We listen, we're like, oh, I know what to do. And then as soon as the person takes a breath, you give them a solution.
Right.
And it invalidates their situation. There's a lot of benefit to talking out your problems, getting it out. People are a little bit like a birthday party balloon. We've all blown a birthday party balloon up so tight that if you keep blowing, what's going to happen?
Pop.
So if we want to enjoy that balloon, we have to let some of the pressure out. And people have to let the pressure out by talking. That's one of the best ways we can do that. And nothing helps us feel better than having somebody there who really listens. So using reflective listening, letting them know you're hearing them, can be the setup that's needed in order to do the problem solving down the road. But if somebody invalidates you by sort of skipping over what you're saying and just giving you a solution, even if you know that person cares about you, you're not very likely to take it.
It reminds me of that classic movie, White Men Can't Jump.
Classic, yeah.
And Rosie Perez, I think was her name.
Yeah,
She was talking to Woody Harrelson. And Rosie asked
He's
Woody.
the white guy who can't jump, yeah.
But he can jump.
He can, yeah.
But Rosie goes, Woody, I know you're listening to me, but are you hearing me? And he was like, yeah, what are you, yes, I'm listening to you and hearing you. She goes, no, there's a difference. You are listening, but are you hearing what I'm saying? Yeah. And I think sometimes as addicts or people that are going through some trauma or going through some problems, they want to be heard.
Yeah.
They want to be heard. And so...
absolutely. And there's value to it. It's not just that they want to be heard to take up your time. They're getting things off their chest. They're getting ready to be able to make changes.
So I guess that's my point of view. If you've got somebody who's going through some problems, sit down and listen.
Well, that's the only way you're going to learn anything, by the way. Like, we don't really learn much by talking. We learn by listening.
Right.
And if you care about the person and you want to be able to help them, it starts with learning and understanding. So you have to listen.
All right. Now, you said you brought some information, and we're going to even let our guest in on this.
Yeah, it's thought-provoking. So
I like that. And our guest is returning to the show after 3 years.
It's the other Dr. Matt.
Matthew Jackson, who was a professor at BYU?
Correct.
English, right?
Yes.
Well, we found out your PhD's in...
It's actually in more the philosophy of education.
There you go.
Yeah. My BA and MA are in English. That's how I ended up teaching English.
How many years of sobriety do you have underneath you right now?
I'm coming up on 4 years. On June 3rd, it'll be 4 years.
And so that's awesome. What we're going to do in this podcast is kind of talk about what the last 3 years have looked like for Dr. Matthew Jackson and what he's doing now and some of the things you might have learned along the way. But before we get to that, a little thought-provoking.
So both of you can weigh in on this.
Okay.
So I have been noticing on my social media more and more advertisements for non-alcoholic cocktails and wine and all of this. There's that one guy with the gray man bun who's looking all super hippie cool, and he's telling you to drink his stuff. And the bottles and everything, they look really realistic. And I know that that's probably driven somehow by my interest, but I've never been interested in that. So I don't know why it's there. But I've been getting that a lot lately.
Yeah.
Then I went to the grocery store yesterday. I was walking in, and I saw this big, muscly, tough guy walking out with a case of O'Doul's. Do you remember that?
Non-alcoholic beer.
Non-alcoholic beer. So I started thinking, like, what is going on? So I started doing a little deep dive reading online. I'm like, what's going on? This seems to be like a burgeoning new business.
I get it all the time because I follow a lot of people in recovery on Instagram and Facebook. So a lot of their stuff is in my feed. And so a lot of people who are influencers in the world of recovery will be spokespeople for these these companies.
That makes sense.
So that might be why you're getting some of it. And I've had a couple people reach out to me and ask me if my interests were in them. And I was like,
So that's kind of along the lines of my first question. I have two questions. The first one is, what do the two of you think? What is, because they're packaged, they look just like tequila or whiskey or whatever or wine,
and they taste just like
apparently they taste just like that, and they have people mixologists coming on and showing you how to make.
They call them mocktails.
Mocktail, yeah, there you go. And I figure here in the state of Utah that might be popular to have these delicious drinks that don't contain
they're called
alcohol.
Fizz and Swig.
Yeah, well, that's just soda and garbage. But I was thinking, what do people in recovery, is that helpful or counterproductive to go down that route of O'Doul's or these mocktails, especially since they look and taste apparently so much like alcohol? Is that dangerous or is it helpful?
I'll let the other Dr. Matt take it first. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I have some mixed opinions about this. I think in some ways...
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. In some ways, it can be helpful, and if it helps some people drink less, I know some people who go out and drink with friends, and they don't want to drink alcohol and get inebriated, and so they go drink mocktails with them, and they'll even have them in their home, and they're cool and stylish and in right now. From a recovery standpoint, I think it's pretty dangerous.
Slippery slope.
Very slippery. I mean, I know someone who was a case of beer a day drinker, and he did get sober drinking O'Doul's. I mean, that was his transition object, right? That helped him. But for me, like, I know I can't go into a bar. I'm very careful about even going into a restaurant with a bar. I mean, I could go do it and be fine, but I'm not gonna. That's not where I'm gonna go play pool and hang out. And so for me, and what I understand about the neuroscience of addiction is that continues to trigger all the same memories and cravings and whatever else. And so, yeah, you're just playing with fire.
Maybe a little too close to the real thing, right?
For me, that would be true.
I think that would be a risk for somebody who is in recovery, because you're right. If you think about the neuroscience of it and the neuroscience of addiction and what we know, that you're looking at a bottle that looks like something you bought at the liquor store. It tastes like something you bought at the liquor store. You're not getting inebriated, but how much of that might perpetuate cravings that you might have.
Right. And I'll let Casey speak more to this as more of an actual alcoholic, I guess. Alcohol was never my drug of choice. I would use it to either enhance whatever else I was on, or if I didn't have anything else, right? And it still, I think, is too risky for me to deal with. But I know you are around drinking and drinkers more often than I am.
First and foremost, I would say your recovery is your recovery. And whatever helps you keep sober and whatever makes sense in your recovery, I say do it, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
For me, it doesn't make any sense. People will say, well, I love the taste of beer. You're a bold-faced liar. You grew to love the taste of beer.
You acquired it.
Anybody who had a beer first and said that was awesome is a liar. It's not awesome.
No.
It's like coffee. I mean, it's one of those things that
you're just like, ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't see the sense in it. You know what I mean?
I kind of don't either, but I like what you brought up, Dr. Matt, and that is the fact that maybe somebody who wants to drink less, they're not necessarily addicted to alcohol, but they want to decrease their alcohol intake, either for reasons of like maybe they're trying to get in better shape, or they just don't want to drink with their friends. Maybe that would be a place for that.
I've got a buddy who was probably at one point 12 to 18 beers a setting. You know what I mean? And that was on the weekend.
Okay.
And
it's a lot of beer.
Yeah. And now what he does when he goes out to parties is he has 2 original beers and then transitions to the non-alcoholic beers.
Oh, okay.
And so that's his plan.
So he's using it that way.
So he's using it that way, and it works for him, and it's wonderful. Okay. For me, it never made sense to me. And another one is it's not healthy. I don't want all those extra carbs. I don't want all those calories. Right? You know what I mean? That's not.
No, that's a good point.
So to me, it just doesn't make sense.
So okay. So I like those responses. Then I was reading along these lines about stuff. And are you familiar with the substance kratom? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I actually didn't know anything about it. Apparently,
you can buy it in head shops around town.
Yeah. So that's what they're saying. You can buy it in a lot of smoke shops and other places. That it comes in powders, pills, leaves, or extracts. And the way I found out about it reading online was, and I haven't had any of my patients or anybody come in talking about this, so I just wasn't familiar with it.
It was really popular about 5 years ago.
It's saying, about 2015 is when it kind of blew up big, and there were a few research articles about it. The article I read that got me going on it was about people using it as a way of getting off of alcohol, and they're switching over to drinks with kratom in it. But the problem is that they say in small doses, it's stimulating, similar to cocaine or amphetamines. And in large doses, it can actually have a sedative narcotic effect like opiates. And there have been some evidence of overdose where that's all that was found in the person's system was the kratom. So but the FDA got so much pushback on saying it was a concerning chemical that they took that label away. And now you can, it's state by state if they want to put an age restriction on. That's why you'll have it in like a smoke shop where you have to be old enough to buy, nicotine. But
and that's that. I've never tried that. I've never been down that road.
So my question is, do you think, and maybe Matthew, this is more for you since you're in the business all the time, like, do you feel like because it's legal, people who are struggling with a narcotic addiction, something that's an illegal street drug, is that an easy way to make an excuse for oneself to say, well, I can buy it in the smoke shop? Because a lot of people who are in recovery are also using nicotine. So there it is right there. It's legal to buy. It's not considered, an illicit substance.
Yeah, but my substance of choice was alcohol, and that's legal to buy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's in every supermarket. It's in every store. It's in almost every restaurant.
Well, we know the addict mind is great at making excuses.
Oh, yeah.
And
Rationalizations.
So what do you think, Matthew?
Well, I mean, part of me wants to go to a sort of a harm reduction part of that. Certainly taking kratom in moderation is better than shooting heroin as far as likelihood that you're going to die.
And no one says heroin in moderation, so
Yeah,
you're right. It's probably better.
So, I mean, I've never used kratom. I know some clients who have used it and really struggled with, and their heavy doses, struggled with even some psychosis and some suicidality from it.
Wow.
Part of it is we just don't know what long-term use and heavier use does. But no, I think it's a risky move. I mean, if you're going to look at it as harm reduction, sure, it's better than some things, but you're replacing one drug with another, in my view. So.
And I think that's the key point right there. You're replacing one thing with another. And if you're using it to step down in harm reduction, then once again, I'll go back to my first statement, is it's your recovery.
It's your recovery, yeah.
You know what I mean? Do what makes sense to you. And
harm reduction makes sense to me as a philosophy. But, who knows? Maybe someday it'll get posted as an illegal substance. I don't know.
Well, I can tell you this. Back in my 20s, I never did it, but there was a drug on the streets called Special K.
Oh, yeah.
And,
ketamine.
And
go to the clinic now and get it.
And it was a horse tranquilizer.
Right.
And now people are saying that ketamine is a way to
there are ketamine treatments for depression, for refractory depression, right? Have you tried it?
I can weigh in on this.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this last time I was on this show. I was prescribed it for depression. I went doctor shopping looking for some more opioids, and the doctor knew I was in trouble, gave me some ketamine, which I promptly took home and abused and fell into what we call the K-hole. And not healthy for me to be prescribed that. But I do know some people that have been, the injection in terms of treating depression is once a month or once every couple of weeks is much more effective. And for treatment-resistant depression, I think there is some possibility there that it can be beneficial.
Yeah, and there has been some evidence to show that. The University of Utah Healthcare System has, I believe we have 2 ketamine clinics currently, one in Salt Lake and one in Park City. Yeah. In that case, I think it's safer because you're using it in a clinic setting. It's being moderated by someone else.
Right.
You can't take it home and abuse it. You're just getting kind of a therapeutic dose, which is not really an abusable dose.
Right.
Right. And there have been, I've had some patients that have said that it's been very helpful to them, and I've noticed a difference in them. But this is funny because, again, back to social media, I'm sitting around, I teach psychiatry residents, and they're super bright folks. These are people who have already finished med school. They're near the end of their 4 years of psychiatry residency. Some of them are triple boarders, so they're getting boarded in 3 different specialties. Very bright folks, but it's hilarious to sit around and listen to them chit-chat before I start talking in the room. And yesterday, the big thing was several of them had been getting social media advertisements for ketamine at home. Mm-hmm. And it's like, didn't we just do full circle back to Special K? Isn't that what that is?
Yeah.
Like you're just doing it at home. And so people are advertising somehow. You can, I don't know if it's, have you seen those ads? I haven't had any of those, but I probably will now that I'm talking around my iPhone. It'll probably pop up now. But
I haven't seen the ketamine ones. I see it for lots of other things, more for cannabis and for psilocybin mushrooms or microdosing.
Or erectile dysfunction. Or is that just me?
That's
that might just be you.
Hey, we're going to have a good show for you today. We've got Dr. Matthew Woolley here and Dr. Matthew Jackson.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about what's going on in his life since he's been sober, coming up on 4 years, what he's doing now. And if you want to hear his story, link back into the comment section here, and we'll have a posting of
It's been
his.
3 years.
Yeah.
So
Almost to the day.
a lot to catch up on.
Yep. You're listening to Project Recovery. Stick around. And welcome back to the podcast. It's Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist. The other Dr. Matt is Dr. Matt Jackson. You got a PhD in what?
In education.
Okay. Yeah. You were a professor at one time at BYU University in English.
Yes.
And then your life got a little crazy.
A lot of crazy. Yeah.
And what did you, real quick, just for those who are listening to the first time, what was your rock bottom?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, my addiction went on for years, and we like to use the term functional addict, and as addicts, we think we're functional or alcoholics, right? And people can see long before we're willing to admit that things are not functioning.
I always say I was the last one to know I had a problem.
Right? Well, I was certainly the last one to admit that I was an addict, right? And so, I mean, things just gradually got worse over the years, losing jobs, losing money, lost my family, my house, my marriage, everything. Went to jail the second time and got out, and my siblings who had helped me the first time I'd gotten out of jail with lawyers and all of that stuff, this time said, you either go to treatment or you're on your own. And so I faced the decision to go to treatment or be homeless. And, my addict brain is like, I got a tent, I can make this work, I can, and it took that much to get me to the point where I was willing to even pause and say, well, yeah, maybe I do need some help. And so being penniless and homeless, having burned my bridges all the way around, the big book talks about that as, the jumping off place where there's just no friendly direction to turn, really. And I had just, I hike a lot and had a place where I would go hike and went up and with no intention to do anything spiritual necessarily, but hiked up around to where I usually hiked and got to a point where I just sort of broke down and realized that my life was a complete shambles and just said a very simple prayer that I just said, please help me. And had this very spiritual experience of just feeling like, it's like the universe gave me a hug. And I just knew at that moment, if I was willing to just try treatment, that things would somehow work out. And I mean, that feeling went away pretty rapidly, especially when I went, to go to treatment. It took me a couple of days to actually get in there. But that got me in the door and started things moving, so...
And here you are coming up on 4 years of sobriety. We want to talk about what life looks like after the podcast. Because a lot of time on this podcast, we have people will come on and we only get that one shot at hearing their story. And I think I hear from people who listen to the podcast go, whatever happened to this person? Whatever happened to that person?
Sure.
And I had someone reach out to me on Facebook and said one of our previous guests has now relapsed and not doing so good. And every once in a while, I'll hear other things. I often hear that people are just still doing wonderful things in the world of recovery. And in my utopia, that's what I like to think, that everybody who comes on this podcast is living this wonderful life and doing amazing things. But we know this disease is horrible. We know this disease is just...
Sometimes relapse is part of the process and not an intended part, but it is. And so we don't want to lose hope just because someone relapsed. But I love the fact that we've had a few opportunities over the years to have guests come back and give us updates. What I think is exciting about Matthew is that he was just a year sober the last time he was here, and now he's 4 years, coming up on 4 years sober. So that's kind of a unique second time on the show guest situation, because he's had a lot more time of sobriety since he was on the podcast than before.
So what have you learned? What did life look like after the podcast?
Well, I had just gotten my first job after having been in residential treatment right before I came on the podcast. And part of my probation agreement was that I would get a job. And getting out of treatment, I applied, of course, for lots of education jobs because that's what I'd always done. I applied for over 100 jobs and didn't get anything.
Did you not?
My probation officer.
Did you not get them because you were trying to outkick your coverage? You weren't qualified for the jobs, or it was because of your legal troubles behind you that kept you from getting them?
I think both of those probably, and probably more. I'd like to think that there was some. The universe had something to do with
divine intervention.
Some divine intervention, if you will, leading me towards working in treatment, because the only job I applied for in the recovery world was the job that I got. And it was an hourly, I hadn't had an hourly job in like 30 years, and I'm back to punching a clock, right? Well, initially I was walking to work, taking the bus and walking. Then I got an e-bike, started riding the e-bike, which was great. But I couldn't have scripted a better trajectory, I guess, in hindsight. I am a 12-step guy. No, you're not.
No, and that's good. And I love the 12-step. I do.
And that's what saved my life, got me clean and sober, right? And when I first got clean, I thought that really was the only way to do it. And I would tell people that. It's like, you don't work the steps, you're going to relapse and die and go to hell. I don't know about the hell part,
but they make you sometimes.
Yeah, it's pretty harsh. Yeah.
Well, and we can come back to talking about that model as compared to others that I've learned, and the pros and cons of some of that, I guess. But the place I went to work at New Roads Behavioral Health, which I love the people there, great program. Nicole, my friend there, director, helped me learn DBT as an employee, so I could help the clients there. But when I started this is dialectical behavior therapy, that may have transformed my life as much or more than anything else. I mean, at 56 years old, I didn't know how to notice and name my emotions, right? Let alone regulate them and start to improve and change some of my thought processes, my reactions to my moods and emotions. So that was critical for me in my recovery, and I think for maintaining long-term recovery. And just the support and connections I made there. I mean, I had, like I said, burned all those bridges to make new friends, and so your job, if you do work in the recovery world, your job can't be your recovery, right? I know people who work in recovery that don't do their own program of recovery and end up relapsing.
I get that.
It happens fairly often, actually. But so that I spent 2 years there and just loved that job and those people. Once I went back and did my SUDC schooling work, got certified.
And for those who don't know, a SUDC is what?
Substance use disorder counselor. So it's there's like peer support specialist, and that's not a licensed position in the state of Utah. A SUDC is licensed by DOPL, and so it's not a master's level, although the Senate Bill 26 that was just passed made that allowance that if you go back and do more schooling, you can become a master's level addiction counselor, which I'm considering, but not today. And so there wasn't a spot for me in the way that organization ran to be a substance use disorder counselor. So I went to another treatment center called the Phoenix, which is here in Salt Lake, and just loved the people there too. Candace, the clinical director, is great. They've got great programs, and really learned a little bit different way to work with clients, and got more into addiction treatment, doing individual sessions with clients, running more groups, learning more about other therapeutic approaches, ACT therapy and some other things, and loved it there. And then one day, I don't know what I was looking at, but this job opportunity popped up. It was probably from LinkedIn or somewhere, for a substance use disorder counselor position at youth care, working with adolescents. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, I need to look into this. So just to circle way back to after I got clean after my teenage addiction, went to BYU and started in psychology. My father's a psychologist and my oldest brother is, and that's what I wanted to study. And my thought was that I would go into working as a psych tech at, like, back then Provo Canyon or somewhere, or one of the outdoor programs that used to be around.
I was a psych tech at the state hospital when I went to BYU.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I looked at, Anasazi was an outdoor program back
That's
then.
still one. Yep.
Is it still?
Yep.
So that was my initial thinking, was that I would go into doing that kind of work and go into psychology. And so that job opportunity just took me back to that. And so I guess I've sort of come full circle and just felt inspired to apply for that job, and been there since November and just loving it. Very different working with teens and adults.
Youth care is one of the older
they've been around for almost
well-established
30 years.
Yeah, youth programs. I think Jim Smith maybe was one of the original founders of youth care, and
might be
is still a therapist here in town today.
Oh, yeah.
So I've known a lot of kids who've gone through that. So you enjoy that shift of working with kids. Teens are fun, but they're a lot. There's a different kind of energy you have to bring, right?
It's interesting you bring that up because we were talking off air, you know, and you're working with teens and they bring their own, kind of baggage to that situation. But then again, working with 55-year-old adults who's got baggage bring their own too.
So the funny thing is, in my graduate work, I never worked with kids until my very last year, and then I worked with 5-year-olds on accidents, a whole story. Anyway, but I realized when I started doing my postdoc work here in Utah, I liked that energy. It's a different kind of energy as opposed to, and so now I kind of have a mix. I have some older adults that I work with, and I work a lot in child adolescent psychiatry at the U, but I like it. To me, it's kind of fun to have these younger people come in, and you never quite know what you're going to get.
So why were you drawn to the youth?
Well, I think part of it was just going back to that initial desire to work with the youth when I was younger. And part of it was remembering what it was like to be a teenager and struggling with some mental health issues and addiction issues. And
not having the wherewithal and the vocabulary to be able to address those situations. So to have someone like you back when you were a teenager would be instrumental.
Oh, we were talking off air about the idea of intervening with the youth and helping them change their lives in a way that keeps them from getting to the point where I ended up in, my mid-50s being homeless and penniless. If, we can help change the trajectory of their lives at this stage at 15 years old, what a great way to start to change the world, at least in this small corner of it. And sorry, you were saying...
the ability to work with the youth and talk to them.
Yeah. When I was a teenager, I went to, and we joked about this last time, went to treatment. It wasn't treatment. I went to the psych ward as a 17-year-old psych ward at Utah Valley Hospital because there weren't treatment centers like youth care or others available at the time. And I got a little, cognitive behavioral therapy light, I think, when I was there. It was like, focus on the positive, choose to be happy, which, I'd heard that from my dad my whole life. And so it didn't really stick and nothing changed, and I relapsed the day I got out. But the kinds of things and the therapeutic approaches that we're offering kids in today's treatment it's just so much more. Some of those therapies weren't even around when I was that age. So.
Before we get to the treatments and the modalities that you're using for the youth, I think it'd be very insightful for our listeners and even us as hosts. What are you seeing right now with the youth of America and, when it comes to substance and addiction?
Oh, boy.
That says it all right there.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, part of it's grim. It's ugly and scary. We were joking just a minute before the show about, there's no no weed in Bountiful or something. Whatever that was saying.
We're pure and
Or,
Bountiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just in high schools; it's in junior high schools and elementary schools. Kids I talk to start vaping or hitting THC carts in like 6th grade, right? And I work with 15-year-olds who have harder lived addiction experience than some of the adults I worked with.
20 years ago, I probably wouldn't have, 5th and 6th graders, I probably wouldn't have started asking them the substance use questions. Now I'll do it as young as like 4th grade, 9, 10-year-olds, because kids are starting with those vape carts and things like that.
Edibles. Accessibility is so much greater now. I mean,
it's a sad commentary just in 20 years. I've been doing this 20 years. And now instead of 7th or 8th graders being where the entry level is, I do think it's 4th, 5th graders.
So is marijuana a gateway drug in your eyes?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Nicotine and cannabis are. Alcohol, I haven't met a heavy drug user yet who hasn't started with one of those 3 things.
Nicotine, alcohol, marijuana.
And don't you think with today's kids today, alcohol's in 3rd place?
Well,
I see a lot of marijuana and nicotine well before kids are drinking.
Yeah, I think the way that the statistics play out, alcohol is still number 1 because of the age brackets that they do. I think if you focused on like that
younger
10 to 15 year set, that's definitely nicotine and cannabis. Just because it's available. Kids just get it and have it everywhere. Not everywhere. We're talking about 20% of the population maybe, but the numbers are increasing. The accessibility, the potency, the novelty, all of that. And these are money-making businesses, right? Multi-billion-dollar businesses that are coming up with all kinds of ways to
entice,
get people addicted because they want to sell their products. And so, it's we're just talking about getting more robust drug testing at our facility because of the substances that keep coming out.
Whether it be kratom, spice, or those other things.
Oh yeah, spice was a big deal.
That changed things. I want to ask you this because you work with the youth, and when I asked you what's the state of affairs, and you went, "Oh boy," a lot of times people who sit in the chair that you're sitting right now, when they talk about their entry into the world of addiction or substance abuse, a lot of times they get there through anxiety, through depression, or trauma. Are you seeing that people are getting into these drugs now on a large part out of curiosity? Or do you still think it's those 3 things, the trauma and depression, anxiety?
Oh, I think all of the above. And part of it's just peer pressure. So many of them start using with friends, at school break, at lunchtime, in the bathroom, whatever, or they get it from their parents have it in the house. Increasingly, parents have vapes and or THC carts or other cannabis products around. That's not uncommon. We know kids stealing their parents' vodka and filling the bottle back up with water.
Done that
sort of thing. But the number of them have access to it either through parents or siblings or certainly friends. So the peer pressure part of that. But almost I can't think of a kid that I work with that doesn't have some underlying mental health issues, whether that's anxiety or depression or something more severe. Certainly trauma has a high correlation between substance use and trauma.
What the kids that would come to youth care, do you feel like they're primarily sent there for mental health and behavior issues or substance use issues? I'm sure most have a mix of both, but
both.
But what do you think is the primary reason parents are seeking that kind of residential treatment for their kids these days?
That's a good question. I think parents would just fold that substance use into the behavior. My kid's got a behavioral problem. They can't. They've been arrested at school, or they won't go to school, or they got other behavioral problems. Acting out, whether that's aggression or violence, and what we we should really have the CEO of Youth Care come on the show and talk about this in more detail. She's
I would love
brilliant. Trina is. I talked with her for a minute about coming on here, and she'd be more than happy to. I think that would be love to do a whole show.
We would love to have her,
especially with what's happened with the treatment industry recently, and places closing down. There's so much negative press about treatment in a time when
treatment
mental
is
health
needed
crisis is greater than ever.
So then let's fast forward to what are some of the modalities and what are some of the ways that you are helping these children beat addiction and seeing that a life of sobriety is one worth living for?
One of the biggest shift I had to make from working with adults to working with teens is this idea that a 45-year-old addict or alcoholic comes into treatment and having lost everything, they're rock bottom. And they're looking for some help. They're open and curious, and
because they've been to the top of the mountain,
or at least it's easy to make an argument that you need some help.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I was pretty resistant the first week or two in the residential. It took me a minute to clear my head, but more likely to get there and be receptive, right? I mean, certainly there are resistant adults who've.
But you're dealing with teenagers. You're dealing with ego. They don't know what it's like out there.
They haven't lost it all yet because it's their parents, and so they always have a soft place to land.
Most of them have not.
They haven't lost their car, their house.
A lot of negative consequences, correct? And so, teenagers know everything. I try to put myself in their shoes, and if I'd have gone to a treatment center like Youth Care, I don't know that much more of it would have sunk in, even if it had been available, maybe. But I really had no interest in sobriety and didn't think anything was wrong, really. So,
when I got to assume that's a lot of them. They don't think there's anything wrong.
No.
But I was talking off air again with Dr. Matthew Jackson, and I was like, Matt, you would tell me that one of the main reasons you could talk to the youth is the prefrontal cortex is not developed yet, and what you're doing really is putting you behind the 8 ball from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that ability to problem solve, pay attention, focus, see things through to the end. That abstract reasoning hasn't fully developed. It really doesn't till we're 24 or 25 anyway.
But you're 17, 18, 16. You're invincible. You can't tell me. You don't know. I'm bulletproof.
Yeah.
Well,
that's.
The midbrain is fully developed, and that's the part that drives both the risk taking, which is necessary, right, for healthy development into adulthood.
Right.
Doing enough.
You have to try things.
Dangerous things safely without dying, hopefully, that you can learn about life, right? And that's the part of the brain where addiction works. And so they're at even more of a disadvantage than adults in terms of their prefrontal cortex not being able to exert that top-down control over the addiction and the impulsivity and everything else that goes along with that. So that shift really from saying, to an adult, here are some things you can try. Here's what this looks like if this continues. Let's talk about the neuroscience of it and some of those things, doing a lot of psychoeducation. With kids, really had to shift to more motivational interviewing and giving them some information, letting them sit on it, think about it, talk about it, listening to them talk amongst themselves and watching them change over, the course of a month or two, and having sobriety be their idea is a much more effective approach than, somebody like me saying, you need to don't do that, do this.
And in fact, motivational interviewing is a modality that was born out of the addiction world, right? Yeah. I mean, the fellows who came up with that were working with addicts and alcoholics, and it's a very Socratic approach, asking questions, sort of planting ideas so that the person, in this case the adolescent, they start to think, that's something I want. That's, the idea behind a Socratic way of talking to somebody is that instead of you providing them information, even if it's the best information, it's yours. It's not theirs. And if you have to go out and find an answer, then it's yours. Even if everybody else already knows that answer, if I go out and find it, I have a sense of ownership over it. Yeah. And for an adolescent, nothing's more important than them feeling like it's their idea.
Their idea, right. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we ended up talking about spirituality in a roundabout way through DBT, and the student who had been very resistant to thinking about sobriety or changing their life or giving up whatever all of a sudden became very interested in the idea. I think because partly they've been there for a little bit of time and their mind is cleared a little bit. They've been doing their own thinking and their own work on this, and came to it in a roundabout way, that it wasn't, you've got to become more spiritual in order to be sober and change your life sort of approach. And having it be her idea and asking questions about that. So yeah, I mean, motivational interviewing is really helpful. The other one I think and youth care is a DBT facility. It's something that all of the therapists and staff there understand and use.
How would you explain to the listeners what DBT is?
So dialectical behavior therapy uses a lot of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and draws from other therapeutic modalities. A general assumption of DBT is that so let me back up.
Is this the thing where I look at a light and then I spill my guts?
No.
Okay.
No. A dialectic is the idea that two things that are apparently opposing each other can both be true. And the hypothesis and hypothesis become a synthesis, and you find a way to get past the apparent contradiction, right? So an easy example is, I really love my sobriety, and sometimes I really want to go sit in my hammock and smoke a joint. And both of those things can be true, and I find a middle path where I can maintain my sobriety and still acknowledge both of those things, right? And so the main dialectic in DBT is acceptance, which I think is missing in some other therapies. Really acknowledging and validating that I have inherent worth and value no matter what I've done and no matter what's happened to me, right? So that acceptance, that validation, that sense of self-worth. And then change, I also know there's some things I've got to change. And those two things are both true. But the goal of DBT is to help people build a life worth living. Originally designed for middle-aged women who had high suicidality and high self-harm. And they found that the skills developed by Marsha Linehan, who developed it, really work for anybody and everybody. Really effective for personality disorders and certainly for addictions.
And teenagers who have a hard time regulating their emotions.
Yes.
Right?
So, yeah, we have a lot of our students come to us, and the argument in DBT is that some of us are born with a biological predisposition to feeling more emotions more often and more strongly, and the inability to sort of regulate that. And you can argue that back and forth all day long if you want, but there certainly seems to be the case. And beyond that, like I said, I didn't learn much about emotions until I was in my mid-50s and started learning DBT myself, and didn't realize how what we call mood-dependent behavior, right? Mm-hmm. Even though I could intellectualize that and justify and rationalize and defend it, most of my addiction was really just mood-dependent behavior, reacting to whatever it is I thought and felt, thinking that I was my thoughts and emotions. And so part of what DBT tries to do is to get people to understand that thoughts and emotions are things we experience. They're just information, right? Emotions our brains are thought-producing machines. That's just what they do. And being able to create a little separation in there and be mindful of what it is I'm thinking and feeling, then I can start to regulate them and do something with them. But just that mindfulness at the base of it that's a huge leap for most people, that first step.
A $10 word is metacognition.
There you go.
Thinking about our thinking. And I think that is one of the most valuable things for any person of any age, but especially if you can help a teenager who's just starting down this road of managing mental health issues, normal stress, and the possibility of addiction. If you can help them, like you said, slow down and create a little space between, I am not necessarily my thoughts.
Yeah.
I am not necessarily my feelings. Those are things I experience, but they don't have to drive my life, because sometimes we talk with teenagers about being proactive versus reactive, right? And in DBT, there's that idea of like, I can be proactive despite experiencing,
Right.
these feelings and thoughts that might be sort of dichotomous.
Yeah, and that's really the main difference, and I think the beautiful part of DBT is that it's a skills-based approach. So many therapies are so thought-centered, right? Change the way you think, change your life. Sort of a top-down approach. And DBT is a skills-based approach where it's sort of feet up, right? It changes the way
Right.
you
Yeah.
live, and it'll change the way you think and feel. Sort of acting yourself into right thinking from the 12-step world is fake it till you make it, right?
Uh-huh.
And so giving kids actual skills that they can do and practice that change the way that they think and feel, and it's like, oh, this works.
And so a thought, building on what you just said, to counter the negative press that residential programs often have, is what you just said is practice. I don't know anybody that has a skill worth having that they haven't practiced in order to get. So even a person with natural athletic or musical talent or any of these things, it's not going to become anything if you don't practice it, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Oh, very hard.
As an outpatient therapist myself, it's hard I always send people home with, this is what we're doing in between visits, right? I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. I use a lot of DBT skills and things like that. But how do we know if they're going to practice? How do we know if that practice is quality and consistent? We try to bring parents and caregivers in to help. But sometimes kids do need a residential setting where every single day, professional people like yourself can be there with them, helping them practice that, so that a month or two of practice can kind of replace a year or two of non-practice.
Yeah, I mean, and we're really working against years of, say a kid really, they function through crisis. Nobody pays attention to me. I don't get what I want unless I throw a complete fit. Right? I throw a fit, I get my way. And so that pattern of behavior may have gone on for 4 or 5 or more years. And so it's a very small rudder on a very big ship, right? To start to change that and turn it around and to get them actually practicing those skills. I have had adult clients who could name every DBT skill, and there are dozens and dozens of them. And I said, well, I know them all, but they don't work for me. I was like, yeah, because you're not actually using them and practicing them.
Yeah. This kind of therapy. So when people think of therapy today, the vast majority of people think of kind of a psychodynamic, sit on the couch, talk to me about your mom kind of therapy. And maybe there's a place for that for some people.
Yeah.
But the younger the person is, and maybe I shouldn't have even said it that way, but especially for young people, it is effort, it is work. If you're really doing this kind of skills-based therapy, which most best practices therapies today are, it means you've got to work at it. And that's one of the hard things. How do we capture that? How do we help people? And sometimes a residential program is necessary. Even in the world of recovery, you spent 45 days, Casey.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have done all that work if it was 45 days at home, would you?
No, I wouldn't have.
Right,
I would have
because
been sidelined by the TV, day-to-day operations.
Paying bills, even the normal stuff, right?
But I think when it comes back to a podcast about addiction and recovery, in which all of those are crucial tools in your toolbox to be able to help you maintain your sobriety, is that you have to do the work in anything. I mean, that's just a good lesson in life for anybody. Nothing comes free. Nothing is easy.
I read an interview once with the facilities manager at the Chicago Bulls practice facility. Years ago, he'd been interviewed, and he said Michael Jordan was the biggest pain. And this was after Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan.
After he pushed off?
Yeah, after he was a big deal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they were like, what do you mean? Because they thought, well, you get to be around Michael Jordan. How's that? He said, he's a hassle. And they're like, well,
why?
Clarify. What do you mean? He said, he's the first person here. In fact, I'll get phone calls at 5:30 in the morning when I'm trying to get up and get ready. He's like, where are you? You need to unlock this place for me. And he said, and then I'll want to go home. I'm going to get divorced because I haven't been home for dinner in years because Mike wants to stay and keep practicing. So what he eventually did was he made Mike his own secret set of keys so that he could let himself in and out of the facility because he's like, you're ruining my life, Mike. You're practicing too much. And that was after he was already a world champion and a billionaire. So you can say people like Michael Jordan are like, oh, isn't that amazing? That they had that skill, but he did the work, and that's how you get great at anything. Unfortunately, because I'm kind of lazy at my heart, I would love it if I could be amazing at something and not work for it, but I haven't found that yet.
Well, it goes back to the 10,000 hours. You know what I mean? To master something, you needed to put in the hours.
I think this facilities guys felt like he was doing 10,000 hours a day.
Crazy. So tell me a little bit of the good things that are going on at the youth center.
Oh, well, so let me back up to when I first got there. I think the numbers of kids we have that meet criteria for a substance use diagnosis, that have addictions, has been increasing over the past decade, it's safe to say, and certainly over the past couple of years. And just since I've been there, about half of our kids have a substance use diagnosis. Oh. And so, as the only substance use disorder counselor there, I can't see 30 plus kids every week, right? So part of what we did was change the programming to have more groups. And arguably, and you can speak to this, Matt, that patients get more out of group therapy often
100%.
Than they do the individual therapy. That certainly was true from my experience.
Especially teenagers.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll hear them say things and be like, yeah, that's totally true. And it's something, that I've been saying for the past 3 weeks, but because it comes from here.
Yep.
So a lot more groups. And again, this varied approach, different therapeutic modalities. We just came back to some 12-step stuff, and some of the kids are very interested in that. Others are just not. But we give them a little bit of different approaches that help them look at, say, their values or self-compassion or ways to focus on the positive and even giving them some neuroscience of how that actually works in the brain. Most of these kids are super bright. And I think part of what they've struggled with is boredom, whether that's in the school system or at home or whatever else.
Both.
So, I mean, part of the challenge at a place like youth care is giving them school and therapy in the same setting and giving them enough, recreational activities, other things that get them out of the buildings and help them live a semi-normal,
Well, I think we'll have your director on an upcoming episode of Project Recovery. What does sobriety look for Dr. Matthew Jackson now?
Good question. So I really have tried to pick and choose and draw from all of the therapies that I've encountered, both from being in treatment myself and other things that I continue to learn, my colleagues that I work with. And so part of that is ingrained in what I do every day. I listen to podcasts like this or others that talk about addiction. So I'm constantly learning and trying to grow that way. But at the core of my sobriety is really this idea of and I'll just say spirituality. And I just want to pause a second and talk about this for a minute.
Yeah.
Because it's really the foundation of DBT and I think most therapeutic approaches. And sometimes we'll call that mindfulness. And for me, they're one and the same, right? And so we'll talk about this with the kids and talk about mindfulness and what that looks like. And some of them will ask about spirituality. And so the way that DBT defines spirituality, my interpretation, is simply that, and we have to make very clear that we're not talking anything about religion, with kids and adults, because there's so much pushback on some of that. That DBT defines spirituality as this idea that I have inherent worth and value, that we have that instilled in us, right? That we are connected to all living things and all other people, so that idea of connection, and that there's something beyond myself that can lead and guide and comfort me. And that's it. I mean, if you can get on board with that sense of spirituality, then we can do a lot of work, right? And we talk about other attributes. We talk about, whether or not kids have had a spiritual experience. And I haven't had a kid yet say no. And I'm like, well, what does that feel like? Well, it feels like it's warm. It feels comfortable or safe, or I feel love or connection, or it feels hopeful. The same attributes that anyone around the world would assign to a sense of spirituality. So that's really where let's try to start with that idea of paying attention to those things. I mean, mindfulness meditation, drawing from John Kabat-Zinn, if you know, he's a
mindfulness expert. He's the man.
Yeah,
Yep.
that, mindfulness is really, in that sense of meditation, is just the awareness that comes out of paying attention on purpose to the present moment non-judgmentally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if everybody could do that,
the world would be a better place.
We'd be in a better place. But so I try to practice that every day. I mean, I have a routine. It's not set in stone, but I try to do some exercise. And again, all these things for me just are part of my sense of spirituality that keeps my program going. I do some reading, maybe some writing, listening to podcasts, something inspirational. Sometimes that's scripture, sometimes that's some sort of self-help or a recovery story podcast or anything along those lines. I connect with people in meaningful ways, certainly at work that allows me to do that. And yeah, I mean, keeping those things central and focused in my life, everything else that comes along, I can deal with it. And
but you're no longer homeless.
I'm no longer homeless. I have a car, and it's an really old Subaru that runs most of the time. I'm in a serious relationship, which is going great, and my kids all like me again. And
so I want to ask you the question they ask a lot of people who get to their 1 year mark. What do you want your sobriety to look like in 5 years? Mm-hmm. So what do you want it to look like?
In 5 more years or in another year?
Let's do 5 more years.
All right, 5 more years. Sheesh. I don't know that most of it would look much different, actually. I mean, I think the program that I work every day and what I've got going on, some of those things I think will remain constant. Part of what I've learned is, and my friend helps me with this, about being curious and open. And this is a central idea of DBT as well. It's called the child's mind or beginner's mind, that having an advanced degree and having been in positions of, prestige or whatever else, there was a time where I thought I knew a lot. Mm-hmm. And turns out I really don't know that much. So that sort of being teachable and open and curious about new things, is figuring out really who I am, which is still a work in progress, and continuing down that path. I think 5 more years, I hope to still be working in the treatment industry, helping people, maybe doing something that's a little more visible, a little more on the program level, but who knows?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's been fascinating to sit back and listen to you guys both, because I'm in awe of the knowledge and the tools and resources that you guys possess. And I think it's amazing that you're out there giving back to a community, that's letting you. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the deal I made with God when I got sober was, I look around, I've had former clients get out of treatment and have, a year clean and relapse and overdose and die. And it's
sucks.
It's a deadly disease, mm-hmm. right? And why and how I survived that, I don't know really. But having that gift of recovery and the part of my deal is I will spend my time and energy sharing that with others and hoping to get them to a point where they can have a life worth living and enjoy life, because life is awesome. It's great,
I remember the first time you came on 3 years ago, and the confidence that you have today versus then is amazing.
Yeah.
And
still in a bit of a haze. I think I had 9 months clean at that point, which that year and a half mark, things really started to come back online. But
I mean, but now you're walking the walk, you're talking the talk, and you're teaching, and that's what's amazing. Dr. Matt, what are your thoughts on Dr. Matthew Jackson? Oh,
it's been a privilege to have you here again, and congratulations on continuing your journey in sobriety. I think that's wonderful. He's preaching to the choir for me. I'm just over here going, yeah, therapy, yeah, mindfulness, purposeful. You're very purposeful in your recovery, and I think those things are all keys. But I'm going to give a shout out to the universe, because you said something earlier, Matthew. You said I tried to get 100 jobs, in the education and the things that you'd done before, and none of those worked out. And you found a spot here in the world of recovery. And then what's near and dear to my heart is working with youth.
Yeah.
And think about this. These kids, whether they know it or not, they have a master teacher. Someone with a doctorate of education is in there helping them learn how to be better human beings. And I just think the universe knew what it was doing, putting Matthew in that position for these young people to be able to benefit from somebody who truly has a background in both areas, education and how to teach, and then life experience and how to become a sober person in recovery. You can relate to them and teach them. And I just think there's no better person to be at a place like Youth Care helping our teenagers out. So I'm grateful to you for that.
Thank you. That's very kind. I guess I would say one thing on just piggybacking on that, and it's taken me about a year ago, I had this thought, and it's really just started to solidify that everything I've been through, all the horrible, stupid, ugly, painful decisions and behaviors and whatever else I've been through, that I would not change any of that if that's what it's taken to get me to the point I'm at now, right?
You hear people stand up in meetings all the time. I wouldn't wish this disease on my worst enemy, but I wouldn't change the fact that I got it for anything in the world.
I wouldn't have been able to get here without having gone through that. Is just the strangeness of it. But
attitude of gratitude.
Recovery is beautiful.
It is a beautiful thing.
Thank you for stopping by. And Matthew, thank you for sharing your journey with us once again on the podcast. And in case you forgot, Project Recovery is brought to you by
Recovery Art.
No.
I blew it.
No.
That's why I don't do that.
It's Reprieve Recovery.
Reprieve Recovery.
Yeah. Even Matt Jackson knows it.
ReprieveRC.com.
Yes.
In Morgan.
Yes.
My hometown.
Yes.
Go check them out.
It's also a KSL podcast, don't you know?
Well, that's what I was supposed to say, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
But I was.
What episode is this, like 377?
We'll get there.
When?
I'm not, I don't know. You're the radio professional, not me.
All right. That was awesome.
Thank you,
I would love to have once a quarter on somebody from Youth Care.